Okay, gang, full of games. Not full of sports anymore. Full of games here, Phil Goyette, and this is going to be a quick, review thoughts video of recent games I've played this year. So I have had the good luck here in Dublin to meet a good group of people that are into playing these longer, strategic type of games that can take a half day or a full day and 5 or 6 players to get together and stuff. So very fortunate in that respect. And first game I'll talk about, that which I've played twice now this year, is Here I Stand. It also got played both days at Chimera Con here in Dublin in May. And if you don't know, Here I Stand is a 6-player card-driven game which covers the Wars of the Reformation, sort of, and the Counter-Reformation. And the 6-player factions are France, the Habsburgs, the Papacy, the Protestants, the English, and the Ottomans, right? And so the first game of Here I Stand, I played as the Ottomans, and I decided I would get off the blocks early as the Ottomans and try and bum rush Vienna right off the bat, and it didn't work well because I rolled terribly and I didn't bring quite enough strength points. So I even got held up at the initial siege of Buda, even, which is like a big pain. So that's what happened to me in that game. And in that game, the French player played extremely well and was looking for 2 turns or so, like they were going to be right at or near the 25-point victory condition that they need. But the Habsburg player, for whatever reason, decided he was going to smash the Protestant player and moved a bunch of Habsburg troops into Germany, which did smash the Protestant player. He got basically tied down completely, but allowed the Papacy to win the game. Essentially, the Habsburg player gave the game to the Papacy in the process, with us thinking that he was maybe giving the game to the French because he wasn't paying attention to them in Italy at all. So the Papacy won that one with France in a close second place. The next game we played, I played as the English, and the English player sort of is waiting on creating an heir, right? It's Henry VIII, and creating your male heir is sort of how you gain the most victory points, and you need to divorce your wives to do that. But also what I did was just built with the idea of screwing somebody over, either the French or the Habsburgs, with an invasion. And when the time came for me to invade, I tried to get the Habsburg player onto my side to carve up France. But he felt that he didn't have the resources necessary to hold off the Ottomans and do that at the same time. So then I joined up with France and started carving up the Habsburgs. And I landed in Calais, or near to Calais. And basically I think I took Antwerp and Brussels, and it was maybe on my way to Lyon, but did not win the game because the French player, who the Habsburg player didn't effectively counter, took over Italy. There's a theme here, and scored enough points in a runaway to win the game. I think that those French wins. So then there were 2 games at Chimera Con, and I believe that the French won both of those as well. So early in the game, the other players need to focus on how they're going to prevent the French from just overrunning Italy, right? And if the Habsburg player is too concerned with the Ottomans taking Vienna, which maybe they should be though too, it means that the French almost get a free hand in Italy. And if they get a free hand in Italy, there's too many victory points available for them. They'll probably win the game. I think as playing as the English and the Ottomans, and Here I Stand, both those factions need the game to last a long time so they can accrue points. The English need the points for the heirs, right? And the Ottomans need points through piracy after they've taken the keys they can take. And you can only score so many piracy points. You need turns to just accumulate them, basically. So they need to stretch the game out somehow. The games, Here I Stand is a great experience, I think, with 6 players who are into it and almost kind of role-playing a bit, because there's lots of room for negotiations. And if you're not taking stuff too seriously and just thinking about how you can kind of, if you're not winning the game yourself, how you can hold up the other players. I think it's a great game for that. I think the military and the victory conditions in this game, after reading more about the era, are just all sorts of weird. So this idea that the English could have landed and taken over, had the English taken Amsterdam and Antwerp and threatened Lyon, then they would be totally the most dominant power of the time. So the fact that they would do that and then not win the game, very strange. Also, the military reality of them being able to do that, I don't think was possible, or like being able to threaten France. Or what I did was I split my forces. And so Henry VIII did a dummy landing in Spain and threatened Valladolid at the same time. And I just don't think, when you look at the military history of the era, that any of this was very plausible. Also, there's all these regulars for every country on the map. And in reality, France was sort of, at least at the beginning of the game, the Ottomans are a different story. They had their own troops, but they were set up completely differently than the European powers. But the French were the only power that would have been capable of having like a standing army at that time, and it was very expensive to maintain, and it wasn't that big. So any foreign adventures of the French in this time period involved them picking up mercenaries, right? And then the other countries would use French soldiers as auxiliaries as well. And like the English had next to no standing army. The Habsburgs relied heavily on mercenaries all over the map. It took them a long time to build up their standing Spanish forces. So I don't understand who all these regulars are supposed to be in the game. And then the final thought on the historicity of Here I Stand is that I understand why the papacy is a faction in the game, because it allows for that counterplay between the Protestants and the Pope, right? Maybe you could have got the same place by having the Habsburgs do that role, but the papacy really wasn't the Italian power of the era. Venice was, right? So Venice is represented in the game as this minor power, and they can be consequential if you can get them on your side, absolutely. But in reality, Venice was sort of the anti-French counterweight in Italy, to the point that the Pope and France and the Habsburgs and the Spanish at one point created an anti-Venetian alliance, which still didn't manage to take Venice, right? So Venice was not, they might have been the, dominant power of the time, even though they were being eclipsed by France for sure, the Habsburgs possibly. Venice was really in the economic driver's seat at this time period, before it moved toward, Antwerp and Amsterdam later on. So again, I just don't think the history's quite right with it. Still a fun game to play if you can kind of work past that stuff. So then I hosted a game called Napoleonic Wars by GMT here at my house, and we played with 4 players. And Napoleonic Wars is also a card-driven game in the style of Here I Stand, with strength points and playing cards and battle cards and response cards and stuff. Point-to-point movement. And obviously it takes place in the Napoleonic Wars. We played as 4 players, so France, I was England, and then we had a Russian player, and then we had, I'm drawing a blank. The Prussians are in neutral. Oh, the Austrians. And the Austrians were their own player, right? And so the one thing with the Napoleonic Wars is that the way the French are modeled in the game, they get a ton of cards and they get the ability to take extra turns. And this is to account for the superiority of the French and Napoleon and whatnot during this time period. So I don't think it's the most elegant solution to the problem. I understand why it happened, but What happens in terms of gameplay, especially as the number count goes up and the number of players, it's a lot of sitting down while France completes these convoluted moves. Also, the allies are really powerful in this game. So if France can pull in, they get Spain as an ally to start with. So they're playing the Spanish cards in Spanish hand, which is essentially like giving them another play. And if they can pull in one or two more allies, then they get one or two more plays. And then you find that 75% of the time is France doing stuff. Right, so I think that's but it might just be modeling the reality of the situation too. I think the game probably plays better. I've played it with 3 players before, and the third player plays as both Russia and Austria, so that seems to even things out a little more. And I think if you played with 2 players, it might even be an even better experience, like France versus the world, right? So, and then the military portion of the game just feels off. I don't know that it's consistent with the military reality of the Napoleonic Wars. I don't have that stuff fresh in my mind right now, so I can't say exactly. But this idea of just using bland strength points to resolve these battles, which can be very swingy, right? So you can come to a fight with equal numbers with the French and just get annihilated. So it's tough to know when to press the button to take the risk in the game, I guess, militarily. And there's no sort of, I wouldn't call it tactical, almost like an operational or sub-strategic play. You're essentially just throwing strength points at each other and hoping that you've got the right cards to kind of trip up the other player. Which doesn't, to me, feel like the set piece battles of the Napoleonic era and who can get where faster and who can force the issue of fighting and that kind of thing. So anyway, so that was the Napoleonic Wars. And then we had MeepleCon in the Teachers Club in Dublin, and that was in February. And I got to play 2 games that day, which was cool. And I didn't have to run either of them, which was cool. So I could just focus on playing the games. And the first game I played was Pax Pamir. And you kind of decide which faction you're going to be at the very start of the game, which is kind of cool. So we played with 4 players, and your 4 players are sort of local Central Asian Afghan nobilities, and they sort of pick sides during the great game between Russia and Britain in Central Asia during the 19th century. Right. And so one thing you can do is at the very start of the game, you pick, all right, I'm going to align with the British, or I'm going to align with the Russians, or I'm going to align with the Afghan locals. And the way it shook out, it made sense for me to be an Afghan at the start, the way the other people had picked. So I was the Afghan player during the game. The game is just beautiful. Like, it's just gorgeous to look at. The component quality, the cards, the artwork, the Arabic calligraphy on the game box itself is just gorgeous. And so for that alone, it's a great, experience, right? Kickstarter is where this game came from, the second edition of it. So Cole Wehrle just put it on Kickstarter himself. I think it worked extremely well. I think big production houses like GMT do a great job with component quality, but they obviously don't take a lot of risks then, because they know it works for them and they're going to stick to what works for them, which makes sense. Kickstarter, you can kind of let the people decide what they want. And if you get more funding and are a designer like Wehrle, you can plow that funding back into the game to make the experience better for the players, which is, I think, exactly what happened here. The mechanics of the game are really neat. I can't go through all of them right now, but, if the foreign powers, nobody really controls them, you can use them if you're aligned with their coalition. So that's a cool twist. You play cards. It's a tableau builder, but you're playing from a small hand of cards of your own. And you play your cards into your tableau. And by playing the cards into the tableau, you can do certain things on the map. But also, you might do things on other people's tableaus, right? So all 4 players will have, I can't laid out for you, but they have a tableau of cards in front of them, which all link up around the perimeter of the game map, meaning that you can play pieces or spies, and you can play spies on your tableau or other players' tableaus, and mess with them, and even move your spies around, so it gives you spaces to move on. It's really clever, super fun to play. And also the game was really close, so it felt like any of the four of us could have won, even though we had a couple new players playing. Actually, one of the new players did win, and actually she won really on the basis of negotiation with the other players. So it was just a great experience, fascinating game. I actually really look forward to playing that one again. And then the second game I played that day was called John Company. And John Company is another Cole Wehrle design. And we played the second edition of John Company. Again, gorgeously put together, great components. There's rules. His rule books were very good in both games, easy to follow, great examples. And the designs also, I'll just throw this in, are there's definitely complex games, but it's not necessarily because any of the individual systems are complex to grok. What it is there's a number of those systems and they all intertwine with each other. And then realizing how if you push this one system this way, how it's going to impact the other systems, that's where the complexity comes from, which is fantastic. So in John Company, you are a British noble family, and you are running a version of the East India Company with the goal of absorbing the resources and profits from the India trade for the benefit of just your family. Right, using the John Company, or the East India Company, which it's supposed to represent, as a shell, which you use just to your own devices, and maybe when it becomes no longer relevant to your victory, you get rid of it. Right, that was a great experience as a convention game. If you're the type of person that is real competitive when you play, which I can be at times, you might find yourself getting frustrated or upset. You do kind of have to role play and enjoy that experience. I think to enjoy the game, which I did. With my initial setup, my family was able to. Well, we got the shipping manager role off the bat, which is doesn't seem it, but is a very consequential role because the shipping manager can place the ships wherever. And what that means is certain regions might not ship any profits out, depending on what the shipping manager, decides. So I took the shipping manager, and then I said, I'll focus on a region of India and try and dominate that, which I did. And then I started working into another region of India. But the problem was I was so invested in the success of the company that all the other players had an incentive to tank the company, so I couldn't win, which is what happened. So great experience. It was a lot of fun. We played for half a day, just like the timing wise was good. The rules explanation took like a half an hour, and we just started playing. So, and you can kind of go through each phase in the sequence of play the first time it comes up and explain it when it comes up, and it works totally fine. So great. Another one I really look forward to playing again, John Company. So 2 wins for Cole Wehrle at MeepleCon for sure. And then at ChimeraCon, which was 2 weekends ago in May, here in Dublin at the Teachers Club again. 60 players this year at ChimeraCon, 60 attendees over 2 days. So usually we do it for 1 day. We did both Saturday and Sunday, so it was a great success. In the morning of Saturday at Chimera, we played Falling Sky. Falling Sky is a coin series game designed by Volko Ruhnke, and of many games fame, but Labyrinth being his big one that I really enjoy. And Falling Sky is a 4-player game of the Roman conquest of Gaul versus the Belgicae, the Averni, and I forget the third Gallic faction, but against 3 Gallic factions who are sort of generally working against the Romans. The blue faction, who I think are the Averni, if I remember, are more inclined to align with the Romans because they are working sort of through trade. So they're sort of like a green faction in the traditional coin games. And they have a bit of incentive to work with Rome to be able to win. I played as Rome. I found it tough to know exactly what you were trying to accomplish off the bat as the Romans. I also got pounded by the Germans right off the bat based on some event cards. The Belgique player can basically play as the Germans as well as the Belgics. And what you have to be aware of when you're playing as the Romans. And the Belgic player can what happened in our game is the Belgic player got himself into a winning position without hardly using any Belgic actions. So just sitting in Belgium and then using the Germans to beat back the Romans and then marching out the Germans basically gave him control of what he needed to be able to win, more or less. So I guess the Roman player needs to march up and pound the Belgics right away, which is what I was trying to do. I just never got there, essentially. It's a 4-player game, but the German non-player faction has its own card, even of actions it can take. And then during the, I don't know if it's the winter quarters phase or what would be like the propaganda or coup phase in other coin games, there's a whole basically player turn that the Germanic player does. The Germanic non-player does during that time, which completely changes the map and stuff. The Germans are a 5th player, right? I don't think this is a 4-player game. It's a 5-player game. I don't think there's any kind of dispute about that. Does this game work as a coin, like a counterinsurgency model? I don't see it. Like, I was using my Romans to sweep. So, like, usually the counterinsurgent faction's bread and butter is sweeping the insurgent factions, the guerrillas, up so that they're less able to operate, right? And that mimics the intelligence war between the counterinsurgency and the insurgents really well in coin games. And this, I was doing sweeps, and even like the Romans not only sweep but like scout, which is like it's actually a double sweep, like another layer on top of the sweep, which makes it harder to get back to hidden. And it had next to no impact on the play of the game, I don't think, in the outcome. And I did it a few number of times. Also, the Romans aren't really trying for area control. They're trying to place down allied tribes or disperse local Gallic tribes. And I don't know that handles the situation really well. I think they need to be an area control faction. If you look at a game I like, no, it kind of got panned, but I think there were some changes after it initially came out. As Mark Simonich made a game called Caesar, Rome versus Gaul, which is similar to the Rome versus Carthage Hannibal game. And in that game, you are using like flags as the Romans to control regions, which is, I think, what the conflict was really about, to subjugate that area. So I don't know that this is a coin game. And then the last thing I'll say is Volko rulebook. So I love Volko as a designer. His rulebooks don't work for me. I don't know if anybody else has this experience. There was a point in the game where there's a leader piece you use in this one. And the leader, when it's Caesar, can impact certain, I forget, even battles or something, in a way that sort of breaks the normal rule. And we could not find a section in the rules that just explained what does the Caesar piece do, right? You had to dig into each of the individual sections of the actions of the other players to piece together, essentially, what Caesar does. Instead of having a section that just explains in plain language, when Caesar is in battle, this is what happens, right? It's just goofy. I don't understand the insistence on not repeating rule sections or not explaining rules in normal language. It just doesn't work for me. So another ARG for a vocal rulebook. So that was Falling Sky in the morning. And then that afternoon we played Europe Engulfed, which is one of my favorite games. And we played the tournament scenario of Europe Engulfed, which basically starts in July of 1942. So the second summer of the German invasion of Russia. So it's Case Blue and the torch landings for the Americans in Morocco. And both sides get to attack and defend, and it's a very tense situation. Sort of unlike a lot of the other games I've been talking about. One thing I really enjoy about Europe Engulfed is that sorry, it's Europe Engulfed is a block. If you're not familiar, is a block game, and it's an area control game. Really basic. You roll dice for your pips of strength on your blocks, and 6 hits at its core, and then there's exceptions to that. The historical fidelity in the game is excellent, right? So you can follow the historical path, and it'll work, but you won't win the game by doing it. So you need to push it a little bit in one way or the other. But you are only able to push off the historical path a bit and still have success. And the time scale works. Like, you're not going to run the map over in a way which wouldn't have happened historically. It's just the design process when you read it in the playbook was that the two designers played the game amongst themselves for like a decade or something. Like over 100 plays opposed against each other before they decided to publish it. And you can tell because it's a balanced historical fidelity game that has just these tons of these tense moments, like when you're the Nazis. And in this game, I've always have a plan in mind, but then you see how the Soviets set up, and then you say, well, wait, hang on, I don't know that my plan's going to work now. And this one, I basically had a chance to either encircle Moscow or turn toward the south and try and take both Stalingrad and Baku. Now, the last time I played as the Nazis, I was able to take Baku, but nothing else. Actually, I had Stalingrad for a minute, but I got kicked out. This time, Stalingrad looked open enough for me to be able to take, so I just plunged in and gave it a shot. But there's this tense moment where you don't know what the Soviet player has in terms of blocks to show you in Stalingrad, and vice versa. So the Soviets don't know where your Panzer armies are until you reveal them. So there's just huge tension there. The dice rolls can make or break you to an extent. So you have these tense moments where you need a couple hits and you're rolling 15 dice or something, and you hope you pull it off. You also have these, a crucial element in the game are these special action tokens, which you buy and then allow you to break the rules, right? By doing an extra moves or extra attacks or reinforcing. And there's a real tension of, when do I spend these things? Do I, as the Germans, need to hold one back? Because if the Allies decide to land early in France, I need the special action to push them off. The Allies need them to do their amphibious landings. The Soviets have one, and they have to decide really when is the proper time to use it to reinforce a fight and maybe sting the Germans. So just a great game. It holds up every time I play it. Makes me want to play the full thing again now. The only issue with the game is it takes a lot of time, right? So the tournament scenario, we didn't get done, and we played for 4 hours. And with a new player, it's going to take, an hour per turn, I would say, right? And if it's a 20-turn game, it's a day. Best case scenario to play the whole thing. So that's its downside. And then the final game that I played at Chimera was Fire in the Lake. So I ran that Sunday morning. Fire in the Lake, I've been able, with my regular group of guys, to play it, 10 times or something, which is great because you can kind of dig into each of the 4 factions and see how they operate and see how strategically you can try different things. I was the Americans, who I think are probably the toughest side to run in the game if you don't know what you're doing. We had 2 new players that day, but 30 minutes of rules explainer and being able to just stop and explain as you're playing really makes it go off well, I think. Playing with 4 players in the coin, especially Fire in the Lake, there can be a bit of a lag or a drag where a player is going to take that, what I call the big move, or they're going to do an operation and a special action, right? The big turn, they can do both, and they can do them in any order. And in Fire in the Lake, there's so much going on that can turn into a lot of thinking about the ordering of what I'm going to do and when I'm going to do it and where I'm going to do it. And, did I remember this one? Oh, shit, I can't do it here because it's a coin control or not. And so there can be a little bit of waiting around for the other players to do stuff. In a convention, I don't think it matters. It actually works well because while that player needs time to plot their move. The other players can check out what's going on with the other games or grab a sandwich or a beer or a cup of tea or whatever. So I think it was totally fine. We played the medium scenario of the game, which was cool. I really enjoyed it. We usually play the full scenario with our group. So the medium scenario basically starts with all the faction specific, I'm drawing a blank on what the game calls them, but they're opportunity cards. They're big move like the Tet Offensive or the Easter Offensive cards for the NVA and the VC. Those cards are basically able to be played out of the box. And also the game starts with some capabilities already in play. So like the American player has more effective assaults off the bat, but also they have the capability where if they're running around assaulting stuff all over the map, they're going to cause opposition, right? They're going to hurt their support among the Vietnamese, which is what happened, right? So it was just like a fantastic way really to start things off. And so as the American, you really had that tension of when do I assault and where do I assault? Top of the tension of like, when do I pull my troops off the board? And got to be careful sticking your troops in too close to the Cambodian-Laotian border before the NVA have moved in with the Easter Offensive, because that's going to kill you. So it was great fun. The NVA won. Basically, the coup card came out as early as possible during the last 12 cards, and the NVA player was just close enough to his victory. Nobody won the auto win, but he was closer to victory than anybody else, and we just didn't have a chance to hobble him yet. I think I was on my way with the Americans, but I needed a few cards to come out first. So the game's great, lots of strategic depth to it. It is a Volko run key design along with Mark Herman, so you would think it would be good. Volko, Mark Herman, and the Vietnam War. So yeah, really, if you're interested in coin and you're not sure where to start, but you really like those designers or you like the history of Vietnam, I say just dive in and try and play it. Get somebody who's played it before to teach it to you. You can pick it up and have a really good time playing. We did. So so that was my fortunate Phil's review of how lucky I've been to play a bunch of these great games this year, honestly. And I'm looking forward to playing more. But hopefully this video is interesting or informative or give you some insight to these games if you're thinking of playing them or picking them up yourself. If you got any questions, add them to the comments. I'll do what I can to respond to them. And take it easy. Peace.